all these weapons package, which ones are truly the most critical for Taiwan and why?
Well, I think Taiwan has the challenge of dealing with D-Day and every day.
What scenarios and what munitions, to Randy's point, do we need for a potential conflict with respect to Taiwan and China?
At some point after Taiwan acquires more unmanned capabilities, there could be a hybrid of manned and unmanned. So Taiwan has a challenge in that it's got to think about the worst possible day and every day.
How urgent is it to secure Taiwan's AI and semiconductor technology?
I think it's extremely urgent. I mean, I think Taiwan has positioned itself, Taiwan being cut off through blockade or even worse, invasion. That's a big problem. We need to keep Taiwan open for business. We need to keep the United States-Taiwan tech cooperation robust.
Absolutely love it. One of the things that's really been interesting to see is actually having the story told about the role that Taiwan plays in the semiconductor industry, thing one. Thing two, understanding how this island is a powerhouse and seeing it firsthand has been something that's incredible.
Hi everyone, welcome to Real Talk. I'm Grace Liao. Today we were truly honored to welcome our special guest from Washington. First, please welcome Mr. Randy Schaeffer, Chairman of the Institute of Indo-Pacific Security and former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Affairs. Thank you for being here with us, Mr.
Thank you for
Schaeffer.
having me. We're excited to be here.
And also joining us is Mr. Mike Keiken, Distinguished Visiting Fellow at Hoover Institute at Stanford University. Thank you. Welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, okay. And thank you both for being here with us. With tension rising in the Middle East and the tech competition intensified between Washington and Beijing, Taiwan finds itself once again at the center of the global strategy. Today, we will cut through the noise to get straight answers to defense technology and what lies ahead for U.S.-Taiwan relations. And start with Mr. Schaeffer. When do you expect President Trump to formally announce the $40 billion arms package for Taiwan? And under what situation do you think he might call President Lai Ching-te?
Well, the honest answer is we don't know. He has said that the decision rests with him. I think a possible window is after Xi Jinping's reciprocal visit to Washington in September. But we don't know. He has said this decision is mine and will make it as he sees fit. I would point out the Trump administration did notify $11 billion arms package at the end of 2025. So it's only been about 7 months since the last congressional notification. So by historic measures, this isn't a long gap, but I think it is a bit uncomfortable for people who support U.S. security assistance to Taiwan to see this announced as a bargaining chip. So my hope is that he will make a decision and it'll be a positive one after the Xi visit in September.
Someone thinks it's something changed after the Trump meeting with the Xi Jinping. How do you think?
Well, again, he's had a strong record on supporting Taiwan. Clearly, he did come out of that meeting and gave a press conference that implied that he had absorbed some of Xi Jinping's narrative. Whether or not that really affects his decision-making, his policies, I don't think we have hard evidence of that. His administration is focused on right-sizing the trade relationship with China, having a strong deterrent capability in the first island chain. So we are seeing all these things implemented. As to whether or not Xi Jinping is really being able to impact policy decisions, I don't think we've seen hard evidence of that, but I understand the concern on this with friends in Taiwan.
Mike, how do you view about this point?
I think Randy's analysis is right. I think it's too soon to tell. There's more meetings coming up later this year, and time will tell how things shake out.
And how do you see the timing and possibility of this call?
It was good to hear his perspective on things. I mean, I think Randy and I are of the shared view. The most important thing you can do is get out of Washington. And anytime you can get out of Washington and sort of hear and see the facts on the ground, I think it's incredibly useful.
Mm-hmm. We had a great meeting with President Lai. I think you're asking about whether or not President Trump would make a phone call to Leipzig, which he alluded to that on the airplane, that he would call the leader of Taiwan. I'm not aware that there's any plans for him to do that. He, of course, made a lot of news in 2016 when he took a congratulatory call from then President Tsai Ing-wen. It was an unprecedented call. If the need was there, whether that were to be to deliver a positive message or maybe a cautionary message, President Trump doesn't mind breaking with convention and doing unconventional things. So it's possible, but I'm not aware there's anything planned at this point.
And Mr. Schaeffer, with Middle East combat consuming vast munitions reserve, is this straining U.S. Indo-Pacific readiness and a delay in key weapon transfer to Taiwan, such as advanced fighters, HIMARS, and precision artillery?
I think it may not be very exciting to the viewers, but you really have to sort of disaggregate all this and look at what munitions are being expended in the Middle East campaign and what Taiwan has purchased and is waiting on and what other factors might contribute to delays. I know with the F-16, there's some unique engineering requests that has led the manufacturer to have to iterate on the design for Taiwan. So there's a lot of things that could contribute to delays, but certainly the extent to which we're expending munitions and how that could change the prioritization of where weapons that roll off the line, where they go to, certainly that could be a factor going forward.
Mm-hmm. Mike, from a congressional standpoint, is there a growing concern of Capitol Hill about these weapons delayed to Taiwan?
I think Congress is intensely focused on munitions broadly right now. There's been a lot of bipartisan support over the last few years, especially sort of as Ukraine continues to look at weapons munitions stockpiles in a very new and different way. They provided some new authorities to the Pentagon to think through these issues, and I'm sure that as they look at Ukraine, they also think about what scenarios and what munitions, to Randy's point, do we need for a potential conflict with respect to Taiwan and China.
Mm-hmm. Among all these weapons package, which ones are truly the most critical for Taiwan and why?
Well, I think Taiwan has the challenge of dealing with D-Day and every day. And when we say D-Day, there's been a lot of focus on these so-called asymmetric systems for counter-invasion. Those would be anti-ship cruise missiles. Those would be mobile and survivable air defenses. Those would be smart sea mines, or really now we talk more about USVs. So it's a priority list based on the worst case scenario, but not necessarily the most likely scenario. What Taiwan has to deal with in the gray zone, there's some overlap of those capabilities, but what Taiwan really needs for the gray zone and everyday coercion is much more capable sensing and tracking and being able to have a comprehensive picture of the battle space, and then the ability to respond and query and challenge these activities of China. In some cases, that's a hybrid response of Taiwan Navy and Coast Guard. Sometimes, at some point after Taiwan acquires more unmanned capabilities, there could be a hybrid of manned and unmanned. So Taiwan has a challenge in that it's got to think about the worst possible day and every day.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Kagan, do you agree with Mr. Schaaf's assessment here, or would you prioritize something else for Taiwan's defense?
I agree with Randy. I would also add on top of that, the drones are the ball game. So when you think about a possible scenario here, one of the things we do have to think about is what unconventional or new technologies do we need to deploy in a potential conflict to deter and to push back on a potential Chinese amphibious assault. And I think drones are going to play an incredible role in that, both in the underwater domain, on the surface domain, and in the airborne layer. And I think one of the things that the Coast Guard and the Taiwanese military need to think about are what are new operational concepts that we need to think through in terms of a possible Chinese amphibious assault. And, Randy touched on this a little bit, not just in an actual sort of conflict scenario, but also in the sort of ongoing, lawfare campaign that we're seeing and the, sort of below combat threshold that's happening every day.
Mr. Sherver, looking at Taiwan's self-defense right now, what is the single biggest area that needs strengthened?
Well, I'll give you an answer that maybe you didn't expect or wouldn't expect. I think it's a mindset change that is probably most required. This is a military that has been isolated because of our fault and other countries that would normally interact with a fellow democracy. We've let Taiwan become isolated due to the non-diplomatic status, non-alliance status. Taiwan has therefore not benefited from all the interactions with modern militaries to understand the changing nature of warfare. Taiwan needs to embrace the evolving nature of warfare quickly and then needs to make the follow-on acquisitions that are fit for purpose, develop the doctrine, the concepts of operation. This is all extremely important and urgent, but it starts with a mindset change.
Mm-hmm. And Michael, what's your perspective on Taiwan's the most urgent defense priority right now?
I think I like the way Randy said it. I would just pile on. There's sort of the mindset piece. There's urgency and resilience, and those are deposits that you make before conflict, and those are deposits that I think need to be sort of a front of mind for Taiwan's leaders. So think about critical infrastructure. How are we hardening critical infrastructure from a cybersecurity perspective? All of the water utilities, all of the power utilities, all of the things that allow for communications to happen. What are we doing to harden those networks and those facilities? Not physically necessarily, but at that cybersecurity layer. I think that's an important piece of it. And then urgency. I mean, one of the things that we've been told is that Xi Jinping has told the PLA to be ready by 2027. I think it's more likely that he's looking at 2028 in the Taiwanese election. But that is not very far away. So how are we thinking about that, and what are we doing today to make sure that we're acting urgently to get these things done?
You mentioned the resilience, and this is very hard work in Taiwan. We have to become the action to the every field. So, Mr. Sherver, as China expands its military presence across the first island chain, how should the U.S. and Taiwan deepen their cooperations?
I think the U.S. and Taiwan need to quietly talk about joint concepts of operation and division of labor. What would a fight actually look like in terms of what the U.S. would do and what Taiwan would do, and how we help Taiwan resist, whether it's intensified coercion or kinetic action and an attack. Again, we have kept one another at arm's length and for a lot of reasons since 1979, and we don't do joint planning because this isn't an alliance. But we need to close the gap a little bit so that we understand the roles and missions that each would take on in a variety of different contingencies. And then everything else follows. Then the acquisition priorities follow, the training follows. So that's where I would start that conversation.
Mm-hmm. Where is the real potential for Taiwan-Japan defense cooperation? What you see, what is the urgent right now?
Well, the geography speaks for itself. So if a Chinese vessel goes through the Miyako Strait, that's not just a Japanese problem, that's a Taiwan problem. So I think it starts with a shared maritime domain awareness and the ability to share data in real time. If one country or the other picks up a contact, for example, being able to share that in real time and optimize the response. But I think if I were to say urgent, it's not only developing that capacity for shared operational awareness. Think about a blockade or a soft blockade. The key corridor is going to be from Geelong to Yonaguni Island. That's a Japanese and Taiwanese challenge. How do you keep a corridor open to keep Taiwan open for business, semiconductors and everything else? If that corridor is not open, it's going to be very hard for Taiwan to survive.
Yeah. Mr. Kaken, what role should Japan play in strengthening this defense network? What do you think?
I think that the Taiwanese and the Japanese and the U.S. government right now are doing a good job of sort of moving beyond tabletop exercises. And I think that is something that all the nations have sort of agreed is something that's important to do, and you're starting seeing those things happen. I think the things Randy just talked about how do you sort of think about operation centers not as sort of everyone having their own, but how do we make sure we're all working together? I think that's important. I think, how do you get a common intelligence picture? So how do you use open source intelligence to figure out, what's happening at any given moment, whether it's the sort of AIS devices that are on ships or whether it's the airborne layer and seeing what the Chinese are doing. And having that shared common intelligence and operational picture is something that I think all of the countries would benefit from, not just from understanding what's happening and where they're operating, but also, importantly, figuring out how to deconflict, how to make sure you're sharing burden and working through some of those problems that you can never do in a room looking at a computer screen, and it's much easier to do in reality.
Yeah. Arriving directly from your trip to Beijing, how do you assess China's normalized Coast Guard patrols off Taiwan's east coast? And what is Taiwan's most urgent gap in maritime surveillance and enforcement?
I think it's very dangerous because I think it's not only a physical manifestation of China's ambitions and claims, but they're starting to query commercial shipping. They're starting to behave as though they are the rightful sovereign. So that's a hybrid of really military presence, in this case Coast Guard presence, but also the lawfare piece. So I think it's very dangerous. I think Taiwan is doing a noble job of patrols and queries on these Chinese Coast Guard ships. I mean, there is a numbers game. China's much bigger, and they can probably exhaust Taiwan's resources eventually. So that's why we talked earlier about the drones and other capabilities that would help deal with these challenges over an extended period of time. But I think Taiwan is also really in need of international cooperation and support. I was really pleased to see that AIT released the photo of U.S.-Taiwan Coast Guards cooperating with one another, because I think it's important that the Chinese see, yes, this is coercion and intimidation of Taiwan, but it's also a violation of shared norms and legal understandings, and so bringing other capable Coast Guards into the mix, I think, is really important.
Mm-hmm. How about Mike?
I think the way Randy put it is nice. I hate to keep agreeing with him, but he's doing a nice job on these questions. I think that ships and drones are really the way that the Taiwanese can help confront this issue. And then there's another layer that Randy didn't touch on. The photo is a little bit of that, but it's just the information space. I mean, the Chinese are incredibly effective at flooding the information space, whether it's here in Taiwan or in other places. And so how do you think about a strategy to confront that information campaign and really expose the thing that the Chinese are doing, whether it's in the Pacific or beyond?
Yeah, with U.S.-Taiwan joint training at an all-time high, what new breakthrough can be achieved beyond arms purchase, especially in real-time battlefield intelligence sharing and air defenses command integrations?
I think the training has a number of really consequential effects. I think, first, I understand it's really helped morale in Taiwan because they feel as though after decades of being isolated, they're now training shoulder to shoulder alongside the most capable military in the world. So they know they're getting the best training that's available anywhere. I think number two, it also allows Taiwan to think about operational concepts in different ways and give them confidence that they could actually perform in the worst case scenarios. And what I mean by that, what we've seen in Ukraine is dispersed smaller level units being able to adapt and make decisions on the battlefield at lower echelons of decision making. And that dispersed smaller unit agility has really made a significant difference. Taiwan might find itself in a situation where the Chinese are trying to get enlargements onto Taiwan. They've taken out the power grid part of the island, but not the other part. Taiwan's going to need that agility, and I think training with the U.S. forces is helping them achieve that. And then, of course, third, I think that kind of close tie does build mutual trust. It builds affinity. I think, although it will always be a political decision, it'll always be something that the president will have to decide with grave consequences at stake. I think it makes it more likely that the United States and Taiwan stand together even in the worst of times.
Mm-hmm. As Beijing escalates gray zone operations in the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea, how is Taiwan Strait security linked to the broader U.S. late Indo-Pacific partnership network, such as the U.S., Japan, and the Philippines?
Well, if you look at maritime borders, there's been discussions recently, of course, between the Philippines and Japan about maritime delineation, and that was the pretext for China to supposedly begin its patrols east of Taiwan. But the reality is, Japan and the Philippines need to talk about this. Taiwan needs to be in the conversation because it's unlikely that a threat, whether it be intensified coercion or even an invasion, is going to stay neatly and conveniently in one country's maritime areas of interest and sovereign and EEZ control. So it's going to require coordination across these maritime separation points. And I think Japan would benefit if Taiwan has those lines of communication open and the ability to share data. Philippines would benefit. Leaving Taiwan out of the equation, I think, leaves everybody a little less capable.
Mr. Kagan, do you see growing support in Washington to bring Taiwan more into this partnership?
I think there remains broad bipartisan support for Taiwan in Washington. And I think members of Congress are always seeking opportunities to deepen the relationship. And I think that's positive. I think it's good to see that kind of commitment. I think Randy and I were talking about that earlier this week, that the Congress has really led the way on U.S.-Taiwan relations over the last 50 years. And I think that's going to continue.
Okay. President Lai Ching-te wants closer R&D research and development and co-production. So what is the biggest obstacle? Is it the U.S. ITAR regulations or cybersecurity or protecting the U.S. defense industry?
Well, those aren't mutually exclusive. I think those all combine to create some barriers. For our defense industry, unless they're directed to do something, they're always going to want to make sure there's a commercial benefit. And sometimes that's hard in Taiwan. It's hard to find a third country market for things built in Taiwan, unfortunately, because of the lack of diplomatic relations and lack of recognition. So the commercial argument has always been difficult. But I think increasingly the operational requirements and interests of being able to have things on island, both for the resilience of Taiwan, but potentially for the use of U.S. military in a contingency, would also drive us in the direction of co-production, if not co-development. Co-development, Taiwan is a very advanced, mature country when it comes to technology and when it comes to R&D. I have a sense that we'll sort of naturally find those areas of opportunity where partnership makes sense. I think the leaders endorsing it helps, but I think the likelihood is it would happen organically.
Mr. Kagan, given your background in supply chain legislation, how do you see the co-production hurdle?
I don't think getting to co-production is a hurdle. I think it's just thinking about supply chains and figuring out where the opportunities are, whether it's missile systems, whether it's other weapons platforms. And I think that's a conversation that's ongoing. But I think there are lots of opportunities for co-production. I mean, the one thing that I've learned about, not one thing, but one of the things I know about Taiwan is that in addition to being sort of an innovation machine, it's also a manufacturing machine. And so I think there are probably lots of opportunities, and it's just taking the time to work through where those opportunities are and where the greatest efficiencies are.
And China continues providing Iran with air defense system, missiles, and weapons components. How does this growing Beijing defense relationship affect the U.S. and China democracy and security? Mr. Sherber, or
I mean, whether it's Iran or Russia, the one thing that we've seen is that the Chinese play a vital role in providing the chips, the software, the motors, and a variety of other things that these militaries need to create, whether it's Shahed drones or other military systems that that the Russians and the Iranians are using. And so it's a real issue, and I think it's something that we should continue to talk about and expose it and figure out ways to combat it.
Mr. Sherber.
Well, it's my turn to agree with Mike this time. That's exactly right. And look, I think if Americans understood the full implications of this, that Chinese technology, Chinese material assistance is going to support attacks that, in the Iran case, could directly impact American service members, resulting in casualties and even deaths, I think there'd be much more outrage. And I think part of what the work we do, wearing a different hat, is to expose that and shine a light on that. It's up to the political decision makers to decide, what they might want to do about it. But I have a feeling if Americans were more aware, there'd be more outrage about the Chinese role in these conflicts.
From a broader strategic view, how is the Pentagon assessing the China-Iran connection?
My guess is the Pentagon has eyes wide open on this. How to talk about it publicly while the president is seeking strategic stability with China, that's another matter. But the Pentagon is on the receiving end of all the Iranian attacks and Iranian capabilities that are directly assisted by China. I know that the Pentagon is also trying to open more mill-to-mill channels, more direct dialogue with the Chinese. Secretary Hegseth is potentially traveling to China. Undersecretary Colby is potentially traveling to China. My great hope is that behind closed doors and in private, they're hitting the Chinese very hard on this, but I don't know.
How about Mike?
I think Randy said it right. I know it's something that the U.S. military intelligence community undoubtedly keep a close eye on, and they do it for two reasons. One, for indications and warnings, and two, to make sure that they do what Randy just said, is when they're in those private meetings hammering the Chinese for their involvement in these activities.
As per controls between the West and China continue to tighten, what should Washington draw the line of supply chain de-risking, and what support mechanism should be in place to help the Taiwanese technology company deal with rising?
Well, I'm pretty hawkish on this. I think we should limit our vulnerability to Chinese dependency as much as possible. There's a lot of discussion about de-risking versus, completely, what's the other term? Decoupling. I think we should be much more conservative in our reliance on Chinese components and critical minerals, rare earths. I think we should aggressively be trying to de-risk from that dependency. There will be people with other points of view that it's hard, it's costly, may not work anyway, that we will always be relying on China for some things, but I think we need more energy behind it and really understand the risks. We've tried this at the Department of Defense, and every time we've looked into this, we've been surprised at how reliant we are on Chinese inputs to even our most exquisite weapon systems. And we've faced difficulties in getting companies to actually follow through and make sure they're red-free supply chains, because it is hard, but they've never really been asked until recently.
I would say on export controls, the first thing that we know is they work, and we should not stop. And so as you look at semiconductors, as you look at other strategic industries, I think it's vital that we continue to figure out where those pressure points are and that we leverage them to the maximum extent possible. We've seen the Chinese do the similar things with critical minerals and rare earths, and that's part of the ballgame, but we do have to figure out where those pressure points are and how we can take advantage of them.
What is the risk we have to face right now, you think?
Related to supply chains?
Yeah.
Well, I think the risk is there's mutual dependence, and I think one of the reasons President Trump seemed to change course at Busan was because he became aware of how reliant we were on Chinese critical minerals and rare earths. That's not an impossible problem to solve. It's a hard problem to solve, but it's not impossible. And hopefully we're moving out more aggressively to develop alternate sources for those critical minerals, and even more important, or equally important, the reprocessing and the refining, which is where China is most dominant, 90+% of the reprocessing in the world for rare earths. If we set about that with some urgency and sense of purpose, we can solve this.
Randy touched on it, but the biggest vulnerability is data, which I know sounds a little bit odd, but it's not knowing where the supply chains are coming from. And so I think that whether it's Taiwan or the United States or the democratic world, that we do need to sort of have the data to know where our vulnerabilities are and be thoughtful about what they are and figure out how we can build alternative supply chains to work around them.
Mr. Kaiken, with generative AI and advanced semiconductors being integrated into defense system, what is the most critical entry point for U.S.-Taiwan cooperation on tech security oversight and building trusted supply chains?
Listen, generative AI is already changing the nature of warfare, and I think it is going to change even more. And so, as we've been here in Taiwan, one of the things that's been struck me a lot is just the issue of drones, right? As we rewind the calendar over the last 20 years, people think about MQ-9s and these sort of single large platforms when they think about drones. In reality, as we think about generative AI and we think about integrating these into military conflict, the bigger issue is going to be how do we create swarms? How do we orchestrate those swarms? How do we deploy those swarms of drones in a way that allows them to have effects? And so I think that's really going to change the sort of nature of warfare. On the question about supply chains, I think generative AI will help us sort of figure out, using data, how we're going to find alternative supply chains, where they are, how we should be thoughtful about them, how do we work through those challenges. And I think that's also going to be something that we'll see play out over the next few years.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Schaeffer, how urgent is it to secure Taiwan's AI and semiconductor technology?
I think it's extremely urgent. I mean, I think Taiwan has positioned itself through a lot of investment and hard work as the premier producer of high-end chips. If that is lost for any reason, whether that's they get outcompeted by technological advance in China, if that comes about through Taiwan being cut off through blockade, or even worse, invasion, that's a big problem. We need to keep Taiwan open for business. We need to keep the United States-Taiwan tech cooperation robust, and I think we'll both not only benefit from it, but really the globe of like-minded countries who are relying on Taiwan would benefit from it.
Mm-hmm.
People always think about physical security. We need to think about cybersecurity as well. And people always think about TSMC. TSMC is an amazing company. You know, another amazing company is UMC. It's not on the front page of the news. People don't talk about it on Bloomberg or CNBC all the time. But whether it's foundational chips or it's these advanced chips, we need to make sure that we're talking about the physical security, but also the cybersecurity layer. All of these places run on software, and they run on what's called operational technology, which is the sort of OT. The operational technology is the sort of counterpart to IT, which is information technology. And we need to make sure that layer is the hatches are battened down. And so that's another thing that we need to talk about and always have front of mind as we think about TSMC and UMC and the larger semiconductor industry, which is very robust and healthy here.
Yeah, sure. And Mike, today, even commercial chips and consumer electronics risk being adverted for military use and facing sanctions. How can Taiwanese tech firms avoid crossing U.S. regulatory red lines?
I mean, it's not a very sexy answer, but know your customer. It's really simple. And so if you're a Taiwanese company, asking tough questions about who the customer is step one. After that, I think you have to be thoughtful about what industries you want to be involved in. But you're absolutely right. At the core of it, a semiconductor is a dual-use piece of technology. I mean, it's really just a switch. If you ever watch a YouTube video where you want to learn what a semiconductor is, it's actually pretty fascinating. Literally, they tell you it is just a switch, like the wall light switch here. And so that has a lot of powerful uses when you're thinking about electronics. And so knowing your customer, I think, is the most important step.
Mm-hmm. So, Mr. Schaeffer, how can Washington prevent overregulation?
Well, we struggle with that in our own domestic marketplace, and I think it's a balance that we have to achieve, and that's part of the democratic process is to work through that. I do think the rapid advancement of technologies is sort of taking care of that problem, right? We're having conversations about regulating AI while AI is taking off and moving into, follow-on generations of capabilities. So I think it's going to be part of our reality that people are always going to want to regulate, and there are good reasons for that when it comes to safety, when it comes to controls. But I think the pace of advancement right now, that's not the biggest problem in U.S.-Taiwan cooperation.
I always think that overregulation is one of these terms that people throw around that I always want to push back on, because if you have urgency, you can push through these issues. If you have focus of mind, you can push through these things. And so overregulation is something that you hear a lot from industry, but I think a lot of times it's just about figuring out that partnership, that public-private partnership between government and industry, and figuring out how you're going to push through these problems.
So how can the U.S. national security community protect critical technology without hurting partners like Taiwan?
Taiwan's a critical partner. I wouldn't want to make these efforts without Taiwan being involved in the conversation at some level. I think it's a very dynamic environment, and the notion of export controls that we had when I started in this business in the 1980s and early 1990s, where you could identify the critical technologies, they were essentially in a box that you could control the export of, and you could do so in a way that was fit for purpose in terms of technological advancement. If you controlled something for months or years, you were probably thwarting the acquisition of that technology by another country. But now things are so rapid and so dynamic that our export controls discussions have to be equally dynamic, which is hard. I mean, it's just hard. And I think one of the reasons we sort of we sort of move to, we're just going to out-innovate, is because the ability to thwart China or anybody else from developing similar technologies is just too difficult through the old-fashioned export control regimes. I do agree with Mike. They work, it's critical, but it's very challenging in this environment.
Yeah. Mike, as China weaponizes critical minerals and market access, how can U.S. and Taiwanese legislative channels work together to build up?
Listen, I think having an open channel between the U.S. Congress and the Taiwanese government is vital. I think Tucker does a great job in Washington. And the best way to work through anything or to find sort of areas of cooperation are through conversations and talking. And I think a lot of that's happening. We're not in government anymore, but making sure that your friends and partners that are outside of government are also involved in those conversations, I think is incredibly useful.
Mm-hmm. So, Mr. Schaefer, how can U.S. defense institutes protect the democratic supply chain from pressure, and what should the U.S. and Taiwan do together next?
I think we don't put enough thought into the vulnerability that many of these countries have, and we view it as almost these countries are left alone on an island when they come under pressure from China. We need to think more holistically about counter-coercion and how we can demonstrate the benefits of being part of a red-free supply chain, and how we can provide assurances, how we can provide alternate markets rather than just over-reliance on the Chinese market. I mean, these are hard problems, but they're not impossible. And it starts with, conversations and trust building where, we're not going to leave a country on an island by itself when it comes under pressure from China.
Mm-hmm. So, Mike, as Washington manages U.S.-China risk, concerns persist in Taiwan about becoming a bargain chips. What message would you like to convey to the people of Taiwan?
Well, first off, what message would I like to convey to the people of Taiwan? I mean, U.S.-Taiwan cooperation is at an all-time high. And so I would say, let's keep working together and let's continue to find opportunities to work together. I think you touched on one of them in your earlier questions. How do we talk about co-production, co-development? These are all very interesting opportunities and areas for potential cooperation. And how do we ensure those conversations are happening at pace? And how do we make sure they're happening with urgency?
Yeah. So, Mr. Schaefer, what message would you like to convey the people of Taiwan? And how can the United States assure that Taiwan's interests are never traded away?
Well, I think Taiwan often has a small country mindset, and that's understandable. It's a small island, 23 million people. But look, it's our fourth largest trading partner in the world. It's the global leader in the production of advanced chips. It's a global good citizen when it comes to humanitarian affairs, when it comes to democracy promotion, when it comes to promoting the rights of women. I mean, it's such a success story that I think Taiwan has to have a little more confidence, and it's okay to project a little more confidence, not just that small country mentality. And I think for the United States, look, our track record is pretty good. Yes, we have these inflection points like 1979, but we've been a very reliable partner when it comes to security assistance. We've been a reliable economic partner. We just worked out that trade agreement. When we were here last year, there was a lot of anxiety about tariffs and about the state of the trade relationship. So I think take a look at the track record, have a little more confidence and trust, and really continue to project that confidence. The world would be a diminished place, and the United States would be a diminished country if Taiwan were to be absorbed by China, and that's a story that needs to be told and understood.
Mr. Kagan, U.S.-Taiwan tech and defense cooperation is currently at its peak. What new legislative mechanism is Congress pursuing to ensure the partnership remains resilient, regardless of the future elections or domestic political shifts?
Listen, I think Congress is constantly looking at ways to try to figure out how to deepen the relationship and broaden the relationship. And by that, I mean, we talked about Japan and the Philippines earlier. How do we have that conversation? I think those are areas of opportunity, and I know those are areas that Congress is looking at. I think it's also just making sure that we have, members of Congress coming here and members of the Taiwanese government coming to the United States and having those conversations in both places. And so those kind of conversations, those kinds of ideas, really will undoubtedly produce sort of new ideas and new opportunities. Again, I really want to foot stomp. Co-production is a real opportunity in that the manufacturing capacity of this island is incredible, and it's something that needs to be tapped into.
So, Mr. Sherrick, can I have your point about this issue?
Congress has been bipartisan on support for Taiwan for decades, so I'm not concerned about change of party or change of leadership in the House or the Senate. I think Congress is also in a mode where they are willing to listen to good ideas, creative ideas. In the work we do advising Congress, there's always a very open door when it comes to our suggestions and policy recommendations. I think it's a matter of Congress really being interested in the different initiatives of how to support U.S.-Taiwan relations. It's not the reverse, how we, sort of move on or abandon or forget. There's no market for that.
Mike, with your intensive senator experience, how has bipartisan support for Taiwan been maintained in Washington? And what practical advice would you give Taiwanese lawmakers to building long-term institutional relationship with key U.S. congressional committees?
I mean, Randy kind of stole my thunder there on the bipartisan cooperation. I think he's right. There has been a long-standing bipartisan tradition on Taiwan issues in the Congress, and I think I touched on this earlier. Making sure that our friends at TechRo continue to talk to people in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, which they do, is an important part of that process. I think making sure that you tell your story in Washington. Whether it's attending events. In fact, earlier this year, I was at an event with Randy, actually, the Special Competitive Studies Project, where your ambassador was there, and doing those kind of things, telling the story of Taiwan and telling that story with Democrats and Republicans there is the most important thing you can do.
Yeah. So, Mr. Sherber, I mean, just with key U.S. congressional committees to strengthen future economics, technology, and security cooperation.
In my experience, they are all open to ideas, initiatives, suggestions. Part of what we do in our work advising Congress is forward those. I think the spirit of wanting to move those good ideas and initiatives to legislation is there across all those committees. So I'm optimistic that our Congress, in any of the committees you mentioned, would want to seize upon good suggestions and good ideas to strengthen the relationship.
Okay. That's all the time we have for today. But in the end, what do you have to share some the message or anything for the audience for the Taiwan?
Well, I've been traveling to Taiwan since 1995, so over 30 years. And what I've seen is nothing short of remarkable. I saw the democratization of Taiwan with the first direct election for president in March 1996, 30 years ago, and the transition of the economy to a high-tech powerhouse economy. I've seen Taiwan, despite diplomatic isolation, make itself known in the world through its good global citizenship, through its economic power, but also how it behaves on the world stage. So I've seen a trajectory that gives me a lot of confidence and hope about the future.
It seems very familiar with Taiwan. How many times you arrived here?
I don't know the answer to that. Three or four times a year for 30 plus years. So
I know you can speak the Mandarin or Chinese.
一点，我会学一点中文。
Wow, okay. Can you share more?
What would you like me to say? Let's see.
Let's see.
I didn't tell you my Chinese name. 我的中文名字是薛瑞福。
Yeah, I know.
Oh, you know, but I'm
In Taiwan, there's a famous name, 薛瑞福。
很有名的名字。
很有名，非常有名。尤其这几天 ，especially these days, it's very very famous your name.
谢谢。
我差点讲台语啊，应该
Or
还
I
是
think
问
in
的
Chinese I should say 不是 no yeah right 不是
不是有特别喜欢吃的东西，什么样的食物你觉得好吃
Okay, you lost me.
What's your favorite about in Taiwan? What's your favorite? Yeah,
That's a hard one.
Onsen or the 臭豆腐 or something you like to eat.
Oh boy, I mean, people are amazing. Particularly, spending a lot of time in China too. It's a breath of fresh air to go into a government meeting and actually have them give you candid answers and a candid discussion. But the food's hard to beat too.
Yeah. How about Mr. Keg?
Well, the best part about Randy's answer was he reminds me how old he is. And I always enjoy that part. This is my third or fourth time to Taiwan.
Third.
Yes, absolutely love it. I think I came for the first time in the late 2010s, maybe the early 2020s. And one of the things that's really been interesting to see is actually having the story told about the role that Taiwan plays in the semiconductor industry, thing one. Thing two, understanding how this island is a powerhouse and seeing it firsthand has been something that's incredible. And then I have to say the same thing as Randy. The food is absolutely incredible.
Mm-hmm. How about the China? How many times you have been there?
Twice.
Twice. So can you compare with what's the difference about the people?
I don't have anything fun to say there. I would say that the comment that Randy made is actually the one that is most sort of acute in my mind, which is there's not a level of frankness in the engagements that you would hope to have. And I mean, it's frustrating when you do that, but I think it's important to keep talking and sort of try to understand what people's motivations are and how you can sort of understand them better.
Mm-hmm. I think how many times have you been to Beijing? Many times. It's very often, right?
Not as much as Taiwan, but still more than I know. Probably half that, 40 times, 35, 40 times. I don't know.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's all the time we have for today, Mr. Schaeffer and Mike. Thank you both of your source insights. Your perspective have given us a much clearer understanding and today's complete international landscape and what is the means for Taiwan. We truly appreciate your time and hope to welcome you back again very soon. And thank you to everyone to watching. Don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. We will see you next time on Real Talk. Thank you. Thank
Thanks
you so
for
much.
having us.
Thank you.
Okay.